Chapter 9. Rose and Mary hurried along the sidewalk up the fashionable street, barely noticing the elegantly clad noblemen and women they passed in their haste. Each had their thoughts full of the respective roles they would be fulfilling that afternoon. "This is ever so exciting, miss," Mary exclaimed as they approached Elizabeth's house. "I'm afraid I'm going to give it all away with my fidgets." "I have full confidence in you, Mary. You are going to be marvellous." "How can you be sure?" fretted the maid. "I have known you nearly all my life, for one thing. For another, you have already proven your abilities in Vienna. This is hardly any different." Mary blew out the breath she had been holding and smiled her relief at her mistress. "You're right, Miss Rosie. Thanks. I needed that confidence booster." As they climbed the stairs and were admitted by the Earl's rather imposing butler, Rose hoped fervently that her words were true. It felt so very different from anything they had involved themselves with in Vienna. She was unsure if it was because they had been in another country, or if it was her father's involvement, but in Vienna it had felt like a game. She couldn't shake the sensation that this was so much more serious and dire. It was ridiculous, really, since there were, no doubt, schemes for marriage taking place throughout the season. But she just could not rest easy about Broderick's involvement. Bracing her mind for the ordeal ahead, Rose smiled bravely, bolstering her own spirits as she was ushered into Lady Elizabeth's receiving room. "Miss Rose, it is a pleasure to see you," Lady Castleton greeted as Rose was announced. "I shall leave you girls to your giggles. Elizabeth tells me another young lady will be joining you for tea. I wish the three of you a good afternoon. I have some calls of my own to make, but our housekeeper will see to all that you might need." "Thank you, Lady Castleton. I wish you a good afternoon as well," Rose answered politely, wishing she was better acquainted with her friend's mother, who seemed like such a pleasant woman. "Come in and sit down," Elizabeth ordered, bouncing a little in her seat after her mother left the room. "We barely had a chance to talk last night." "I know," Rose grinned. "We were both a little too popular for conversation." "Are you complaining?" Elizabeth asked with an answering grin. "Not at all," Rose replied with enthusiasm. "I am very much enjoying being a popular debutante, I will admit freely." "Did any of the gentlemen catch your interest?" Elizabeth was impatient to find out. "Not in the least," Rose admitted with a touch of reluctance. "I fear the efforts of the season will be for naught. My poor mother is going through such a trial to sponsor me, and I cannot muster a drop of enthusiasm for any of the eligible men being introduced to me." Catching sight of Elizabeth's raised eyebrow, Rose grinned and continued. "Nor any of the ineligible ones either." "Rosamond Smythe, which ineligible gentleman have you been speaking with?" "I danced with the Earl of Heath last night. The on date is that his wife did not die of natural causes. The whispers are that he helped her fall down those stairs. But he is so tragically handsome that I could not resist when he asked me for a dance. Thankfully, although my mother seems to pay no attention to me when we are at a ball, she chose to join me as he was escorting me from the dance floor and glared him away from my presence so I do not have to worry about him trying to call on me." Elizabeth gave a delicate shudder at her friend's words. "Can you imagine? How would you handle it if he wanted to take you for a ride in the park?" Rose shrugged and answered with simple practicality. "Well, surely I would be perfectly safe, at least until after the wedding." This caused both girls to burst into laughter. Rose was the first to sober and bring both their attentions back to the matter at hand. "So, you are going to lead the conversation, I take it, as you are the hostess." "Of course," Elizabeth answered with pride. "Have you thought about how you're going to manage to get Lady Anne to open up about her father's plans?" "We are going to gossip about the eligible gentlemen, and how we could possibly get any of them to come up to scratch. You shall lament about your lack of connections, and your fears that this will hold back certain likely candidates. Hopefully this will play upon her delicate feelings, and she will offer you some suggestions that she has received." "You, my dear, are brilliant." "I cannot take the credit. I thought of it last night when you were telling that young baron about your father's suggestions for getting through boring lectures in the house." "I am so pleased that my father's advice is getting so much mileage," Rose answered with dry amusement. They quickly hushed as they heard the door knocker sound. Elizabeth pulled the bell for the housekeeper just as the butler announced Lady Anne. "Welcome, welcome," Elizabeth called out, rising to greet the new arrival. Both girls feigned believable happiness at seeing the younger girl arrive. Lady Anne flushed with happiness, making Rose feel a stab of guilt, which she blithely ignored. "Thank you so much for inviting me," Lady Anne began shyly. "I find it is rather difficult to make friends, as ultimately we are actually in competition, vying for the attentions of the eligible gentlemen." Elizabeth and Rose smiled at Anne briefly, before replying as the housekeeper chose just that moment to arrive. Elizabeth requested that tea service be provided shortly, and the housekeeper hurried away. Turning back to Lady Anne, Elizabeth continued as though there had been no interruption. "It is funny you should say that. Miss Rose and I were just talking about how difficult it is to catch the eye of certain gentlemen, to whose suit we might be amenable. I have no wish to appear as though I am competing with any of my friends, but it is a challenge to get any of the eligibles to commit themselves. Would you not agree?" Rose was nodding to indicate her agreement, although inwardly she was grimacing. What foolishness the season was, she thought with derision. Variations of this conversation were likely taking place in all the salons and parlours throughout town as they spoke. This prompted her next words. "Lady Anne, I never thought of it as a competition, but I fear you are quite correct. Why do we not agree to lend each other a hand, instead of interfering with each other's efforts? We could compare notes and share strategies." "What a lovely idea," Lady Anne replied, although her enthusiasm was a trifle weak. "Do either of you have your sights set on anyone in particular? I saw you went in to dinner with Lord Terence Leonard. Did you consider him a potential partner?" Rose did not have to feign her sigh of regret. "Not at all, I'm afraid. I think I will require a husband to be a little older. Since I have travelled and seen a little more of the world than the average girl, I think I will require someone with a great deal more experience than poor Lord Terence. He was pleasant enough, and I am certain he will make some lady a wonderful husband, but I am not certain he is even in the market for a wife at the moment." Elizabeth took the reins of the conversation back into her capable hands. "My dinner companion was pleasant company as well, but in my opinion he had little too much to say about his mother. I need a husband who is ready to set up his own establishment, or, better yet, one who already has. I do not wish to compete with my mother-in-law for my husband's affections." "Oh, good heavens, no! That would be perfectly dreadful. What about you, Lady Anne? I did not take particular notice of anyone you were spending time with last night. Were any of the gentlemen eligible for you in your estimation?" Lady Anne still seemed a trifle shy, and Rose wondered briefly if they would actually be able to get the young woman to confide in them. Thankfully, they were not left wondering for long. "A few of the gentlemen I danced with last night seemed perfectly lovely," she answered softly with a small smile. "In particular, Lord Dunbar and Lord Edgecombe." "Oh, Lord Edgecombe! I did not even notice him there last night," Elizabeth answered, not with complete honesty. "How lucky for you that he asked you to dance. I had the pleasure last week. Besides being so handsome, he is also such a great dancer." "Yes, he is," Lady Anne answered shyly. "And he seems very interesting." "Interesting?" Rose questioned. "Oh, yes. Would it not be dreadful to sit down to breakfast and dinner every day with a dead bore?" Rose and Elizabeth burst into chuckles at Anne's words. "Oh, yes, I can see your point entirely," Elizabeth agreed, while Rose was still giggling too hard to formulate an answer. Anne continued, much to the other girls' surprise. "Most of the gentlemen I have met only wish to discuss the weather or the season or their politics. They do not actually wish for you to have anything to say about their politics, though, mind you. As a debutante, you are expected to merely sit and listen to them. If you can muster up awe while you do that, it is all the better. I truly do not think I could play act for the rest of my life, so then where would we be?" Rose felt her jaw go a little slack over Anne's words. The girl obviously had hidden depths of which she had been unaware. Her predicament grew. She resolved to hold her silence and wait to see how the afternoon developed. After pouring the tea that the housekeeper had delivered unobtrusively, Elizabeth once again steered the conversation. "I fear you are absolutely correct, my dear Lady Anne. But what are we to do? Many of the gentlemen I have met thus far are rather dull, and the ones who are not are so highly sought after, I am uncertain how to engage their affections." "My father has told me countless times that affections can be engaged after the nuptials have been arranged, so really all you have to do is set your mind to the task of which gentleman is best for you, and then arrange it." Anne said this with such stark simplicity that both the other girls looked at her, unsure what she was getting at. This caused her to let escape a tinkle of laughter. "I must confess I am not fully certain what you mean by your words," Elizabeth apologized. "That is completely understandable. It is a trifle unorthodox, I will agree, but my father has assured me that it will be the best plan to ensure my future happiness. All I have to do is find myself in a compromising situation with the gentleman of my choice. He will arrange everything else, and before you know it, I will be happily wed to a wonderful lord." Rose just had to ask, "But do you really think you could be happy with someone you have tricked? Would he not be terribly angry? I cannot see how that would be a good way to start off your new life together." "Surely, if he allowed himself to get into the compromising position, he must have feelings for me of some sort. Would you not agree?" Anne reasoned. Rose was not so certain, but did not know how to articulate her thoughts on such an indelicate subject. She contained herself to an uncomfortable shrug. Anne continued, "And maybe he won't even have to find out that he has been tricked." "Do you think that would be possible to pull off?" Elizabeth asked before she thought of another question. "Have you tried this already?" Again, Anne let out one of her tinkles of laughter. "Not yet. I have been setting the stage thus far, making sure the gentleman in question is actually to my liking, and laying the groundwork for my plan." Rose could only look at her in awe, amazed that she was able to present such an innocent face to society, and yet be so devious inside. She had seemed like such a quiet girl, dull almost. Although she felt a level of sympathy for the girl, she no longer felt any compunction about trying to waylay her plans, if they still included the Duke of Wrentham. She hoped Elizabeth would pose that question next. "Is Lord Edgecombe to be your chosen one?" Rose smiled at her friend's brief hesitation before saying the word one. She wondered briefly if Elizabeth had been about to say victim, but had then thought better of it. "I thought so. He is so very handsome and so kind. I think he would be a most comfortable spouse, and it would be a pleasure to share coffee with him each morning. But my father has convinced me that the Duke of Wrentham is a far better catch, and I cannot say I disagree. Who would not wish to be a duchess after all?" Anne said this with a matter-of-fact air, but Rose sensed sadness beneath. It would seem Lady Anne did not have a deep yearning to be a duchess. Rose thought to test her theory. "I am not certain that I would wish to be a duchess. My father is merely a baron, so while we have been comfortable my entire life, we have never lived spectacularly. I think it might be a trifle awkward to go from being a baron's daughter to being a duchess. I have so little experience with running a large house, let alone multiple of them, as I am sure Wrentham must have. And there would constantly be people wishing to curry favour with you for all sorts of various reasons." Anne nodded her serious agreement. "I agree with you, Miss Smythe, but the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. And my father would be so pleased. It seems to be very important to him, and I cannot say that I particularly object. The Duke would, will, make a very fine husband, to be sure." Rose, hoping for further revelations, decided not to argue any further. "To be sure," she agreed with unfeigned enthusiasm. "Alex would make an excellent husband for someone. Just not her, or Lady Anne," Rose thought with restlessness stirring. I must say, I find your plan rather intriguing, Elizabeth said. Perhaps I could use it for myself. I do not cherish the thought of enduring any more seasons. I would like to get on with my life without being in the marriage mart for another year. Do you not agree, my dear Rose? You do not have too long to spend on the shelf either. Rose felt her lips twist into a wry smile. Elizabeth was using truth to disguise their deception. "'Tis true," Rose agreed. "My mother assures me that I absolutely must find a mate shortly, or I will remain a spinster, and my family will never allow me to set up my own establishment, so I will be confined to being a drain on my brother for the rest of my days. I can assure you that I have no wish to be an unwanted guest in my childhood home. So yes, my dear Lady Anne, I beg of you to share with us a few bits of wisdom as to how we too can ensure we get the groom of our choice. And then perhaps we can figure out together who Elizabeth and I should choose." These must have been exactly the right words. Anne giggled girlishly and launched into her instructions. "You have to be absolutely certain of your choice before you launch your plan, because my father has assured me there is no going back once you begin. It is really quite simple. You lure your intended into a sense of security with you, then arrange to be found alone with him, preferably looking compromised, by someone who can enforce the situation, like a parent or brother. In my case, my father will happily play that role. Have you thought of what you would do if the gentleman refuses, especially if he does realize it has been a trap?" Rose could not help but ask. "No true gentleman will refuse. My father has been adamantly clear on that particular subject." Rose felt her stomach turn with disgust over such underhand dealings. Hoping it was not written on her features, she carried on. "That seems to be simple enough. Now, though, comes the tricky part. I have not found anyone that particularly strikes my fancy. Do either of you have any suggestions? Or do you have any candidates for yourself, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth was playing her part remarkably well. She giggled as she said, "This is prodigiously entertaining, I must say. I shall have to think hard on the matter. There are so many possibilities. But you are quite correct, Lady Anne. One must be absolutely certain of one's choice before setting such a plan in motion." She paused for a moment, feigning deep thought over her possible choices. "Tell us, please, Lady Anne, I beg of you. How could you be so certain in your choice? What made the Duke so much more appealing than the Viscount? Is it merely the more elevated title? Or did you perhaps become privy to know the actual status of their funds? I have heard that Edgecombe is very comfortably heeled, so I would not see that as a particular factor." "You are correct. It was not an easy choice. Those factors do all play into it, of course, but the fact is, my father helped me decide. Like I said, my preferences had been leaning in a different direction originally, but my father was quite insistent that the Duke was a better choice for me." "That is interesting. I do not think I would be comfortable discussing the strategy with my parents." There was so much truth in what Rose was saying, she did not have to force her reluctant tone. "I cannot think of anyone other than you two ladies with whom I could discuss my options. Do you know what factors your father used to help him decide who would be best for you?" Rose encountered Elizabeth's gaze and had to fight to control her satisfied smile as she saw the admiring look in her friend's eyes. Elizabeth was clearly impressed with that last line of questioning. Rose only hoped it would provide some sort of enlightenment from Anne. "He said he had received excellent advice from his friend, Sir Jason Broderick, about the circumstances of all the eligible gentlemen when we first arrived in London. My father said it was his estimation that the Duke of Wrentham was my best choice. Since I trust my father, and had not truly formed any deep attachments, I was happy to go along with his choice." "I see, so he did not tell you the reasons. That is really not of much help to either of us, sadly," Rose complained. "I do believe some of the things that swayed my father have something to do with the Duke's acquaintances. My father likes to talk about connections. It seems to be very important. I do not understand it, really, but there you have it. The best advice I can give you, according to my father, is to find a man with good connections to marry. Rose did not fully understand either, but thought she might know much more on that subject than the other two ladies. She did not want to reveal her knowledge, so she feigned ignorance. Connections, I see. Like a good family, right? I can see that might be a good thing to look for. Lord Dunbar comes from a large extended family. Perhaps he might be a good match for one of us. She looked at Elizabeth and grinned. Elizabeth joined in with the fun. I think the Viscount of Rothsay also has many aunts, uncles, and cousins, and he is quite handsome, and rumoured to be outrageously wealthy. I can see that there are many options. I shall have to think on the matter a little longer before I can set any plan in motion, Rose concluded before asking one more pertinent question. Have you already set your plan in motion, my lady? Are you in need of any assistance from us? Anne smiled with genuine appreciation at Rose's offer, making her wish she could bite off her tongue. That is so kind of you, Miss Smythe. Thank you for the offer. I will keep it in mind. I do not think I am quite ready to set it in motion yet. The Duke has not asked me to dance at the last couple of balls we have attended, so I do not think he is going to cooperate with my plans just yet. I need to get him a bit more comfortable with me before I can do anything else. That would make sense, Rose concluded, hoping her relief was not too evident. After that, Elizabeth must have concluded they had asked all they could, as she steered the conversation into more acceptable avenues. Before long, Lady Anne stood to take her leave. When the door had closed behind her, Elizabeth looked at Rose and burst into raucous laughter. "Oh my! What have we gotten ourselves involved in? It is exactly what we had feared, so I do not understand your question," Rose replied, puzzled. "This is just so ridiculous, if you ask me. Can you picture our fathers sitting down together to discuss which gentleman would be the best one to trick into marrying one of us? It just is not done. This leads me to wonder how Sir Broderick is involved in all this." Rose did not wish to divulge what she knew about the night, so she feigned ignorance. Perhaps Wrentham will have discovered some plot from him, and will be able to enlighten us. She then rose to take her leave. I should probably be on my way. The hour grows late, and we still have to make our preparations for the evening's affairs. Which invitations have you accepted for tonight? My mother and I are going to a poetry reading at the Duke of Yorkshire's home. Really? That sounds interesting. I do not think we received an invitation to that. Rose was sorry they would not be at the same events. I believe it is to be a small event. I hope it is not dull for you. I shall be dancing until the wee hours of the morning at the Rotherham Ball tonight. It should prove to be enjoyable. Will you be able to call on me tomorrow to let me know how your meeting goes with Wrentham in the morning? Elizabeth had not forgotten the more scandalous part of the entire situation. Rose grinned. I will do my best, she promised as she took her leave. That night at the ball, Rose again whirled from partner to partner, enjoying each set to the utmost. She was a little discomfited by encountering the gentleman they had been discussing that afternoon, but amused herself asking the Viscount of Rothsay about his family. I have heard your parents both come from large families. Do you enjoy having so many aunts, uncles, and cousins, my lord? I do not give it much thought, Miss Smythe, as it has been a fact of my entire life. I suppose that makes sense, my lord. I merely asked because I do not have much extended family to speak of. Neither of my parents have either of their parents still alive. My father was an only child, and my mother only had one sister. That strikes me as being rather sad, miss. Yes, it does me, too, Rose agreed, wrinkling her brow with perplexity. I never gave it much thought, but I can see that life would never be lonely if one had grown up with a plethora of cousins. It was certainly never lonely, nor was it quiet, the Viscount agreed with a smile. Rose could not quite suppress her melancholic sigh. It must have been quite lovely. Do you remain close with all those family members? Lord Rothsay smiled. I am, actually. It does make holidays so very chaotic, but it is what I'm used to. I think it would be difficult to grow accustomed to for someone unused to the crowds. Rose wondered if there was an unspoken message in there for her. She was looking at the Viscount with interest, but then felt that familiar prickle along the back of her neck, and knew the Duke was present. There would be no more thoughts of potential mates for her until this affair was safely settled. She was relieved when the set came to an end. The Viscount exchanged small talk with her until another gentleman came to request her hand for the next set. Rose was amused to see that it was Lord Anthony Edgecombe. "Am I to partner with every nobleman we discussed this afternoon?" she wondered with strange curiosity. "You look like you are having a fine time this evening, Miss Smythe," Lord Edgecombe began. "I am, actually. Thank you, my lord. I had not thought I would ever enjoy this season, but it is turning out to be remarkably amusing." "You did not think to enjoy the season, miss?" he repeated with surprise. "I thought every young lady pined for the day she could make her debut." "When I was a young girl, perhaps I did, my lord, and I will admit that I was not dreading the experience at all. But my first impression of a London season was not all that favourable. Now that I have begun to make friends, it is an entirely different matter." "Then I am relieved for your sake, my lady. I was just discussing with Lord Rothsay his large family. Do you have many relatives yourself, my lord?" Lord Edgecombe cast her a sceptical look, which caused Rose to feel the colour rising in her cheeks. "Of course, my lord, I am well aware of your family, such as your father, the Earl of Trent. I just meant—" At this she trailed off in confusion and embarrassment. Lord Anthony appeared to be uncertain as to why she was asking about this, but he seemed to find her confusion perfectly charming. He chuckled. "Have no fear, my lady. I think I understand. You mean to ask how much of my family I am actually close with, do you not?" Rose, still blushing, was unsure if that was exactly what she meant, but nodded anyway. Lord Anthony still grinned as he continued. "I do have many relatives, but we were not an overly close family when I was a youngster. My mother died when I was a boy, and then my father remarried. My brothers and sisters are much younger than me. It is difficult to be close to them when they are away at school most of the time, and I am in London much of the year." "I am so sorry about your mother. That must have been so difficult. Losing my brother was hard enough. I cannot imagine losing a parent at a young age." Rose's soft heart went out to him, and it stirred up her own grief. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Oh, no, my lady, I beg of you. It just will not do for you to cry at the Rotherham ball. I shall never receive another invitation if it becomes known that I have made someone weep." Anthony looked so distressed that it brought a watery chuckle to Rose's lips. "No, no, my lord, have no fear. I shall not weep, I promise you." Rose managed to muster her composure quite quickly, a fact for which she was very proud of herself. Rose could see that the Viscount was reluctant to discuss the matter further, but he kindly asked, "Your grief is still very fresh, is it not?" "It is," Rose admitted. "It has been 3 years, but no one ever wants to talk about him with me, so it feels rather raw. My parents especially cannot bear to even hear his name mentioned. And my other brother is away, so I hardly ever see him, and, of course, I cannot discuss Luke with him." Rose could feel her lip quiver, so she gave a little laugh to disguise it. Anthony looked at her with knowing eyes, but declined to comment. Rose was relieved when she noticed the set was nearly over. She spied Lady Anne in the crowd surrounding the dance floor. "Oh, my lord, there is my friend, Lady Anne. She would no doubt be a good partner for you to dance with next." Rose felt her cheeks warming over her forward behaviour, but she held the Viscount's eye unflinchingly, with a slight smile touching her lips. Lord Edgecombe looked at Lady Anne and smiled, just as Lord Dunbar came to invite Rose to share the next dance with him, thus freeing Lord Anthony from the need to keep her company. Rose watched as Lord Edgecombe swept Anne onto the dance floor. She hoped she was doing neither of them a disservice. "Is everything all right with you, Miss Rose? You look a little troubled," Wesley inquired with a concerned crease in his forehead. "All right and tight," Rose replied with as genuine a smile as she could muster. "It has just been an eventful day, and I am feeling a trifle overtaxed." "Would you rather we sit out this number? I would be happy to procure you a glass of punch or ratafia." "That is such a kind offer, my lord, but I am perfectly happy to dance this number instead. I am not physically overtired." she explained, without going into detail. She wished she had just accepted his offer, as she could see his thought processes circling around her words, no doubt reading more into them than she would wish. With a huff of exasperation, she launched into an explanation. "If you really must know, I shall tell you." "No, no, my lady, I did not wish to pry," he protested, with a gleam of amusement in his eyes. "You absolutely did wish to pry. You were just too polite to do so," she countered, with her own amusement rising. "The thing is, I made the mistake of asking a few gentlemen about their families this evening." At seeing the puzzled look upon the Viscount's face, she smiled with genuine amusement. "Seems unexceptional, does it not? But Lord Edgecombe told me his mother passed away when he was a youngster, and that reminded me about my brother and how no one ever talks about him, and I really miss him. It stirred up a murky mess of feelings that cannot be easily sorted in a place such as this. I do believe Lord Edgecombe will be avoiding me like the plague from now on." Wesley and Rose shared a small laugh over her last words, but then Wesley sobered and made her a generous offer. "I know you probably cannot speak with Wrentham on this subject, and I am a poor substitute. But if you would like, I would be happy to talk to you about your brother. At some other time, of course." Rose grinned. "Did you know my brother well?" "Not as well as Wrentham and his brother, but we did spend a couple years at school together. And I was there." He did not elaborate, but Rose knew exactly what he was referring to. She looked at him with widened eyes. "Then I will happily take you up on your offer, my lord. Thank you ever so much. When this situation with Alex is sorted, perhaps we could meet in some perfectly respectable location. My parents would have apoplexy if they were to catch us in such conversation, so it would be impossible at my house." "Very well. I will call around to take you for a drive sometime." "That would be lovely. Thank you, my lord." Rose was grateful for the Viscount's offer, but at that moment she wished to be alone, or at least far away from him, and the sympathy and curiosity she could see shining in his eyes. While she wanted to hear what he might have to say about the day her brother died, she had a strong feeling it was going to complicate her life, not simplify it. But then she gave her head a shake, thinking it was hardly possible for it to get any more complicated than it currently was with her involvement with Wrentham and Broderick's schemes. Thinking about him must have conjured him, as Rose once again felt the familiar prickle at the back of her neck, indicating the Duke was present and most likely looking her way. Her eyes were drawn to his. She didn't want to acknowledge him, but the magnetic pull was impossible to resist. All the sounds and chaos in the busy ballroom fell away, and for a moment she felt as though they were the only two in the room. She felt her eyes widen as Alex stepped in her direction. Feeling the breath catch in the back of her throat helped to break the spell that had befallen her, and she tore her eyes away. The flutter in her stomach was not as easy to control, but she was proud of herself as she turned back to Lord Dunbar with a neutral smile upon her face. The buzzing in her ears was hard to ignore, and she truly wished this night was over. Wesley must have sensed her discomfort. "Are you promised to someone else for the next dance? Or would you like me to escort you to your mother? Or perhaps to procure a glass of punch?" Rose's smile was genuine as she appreciated his kindness. "A glass of punch would be most delightful at this moment. Thank you, my lord." Walking away from the moment, Rose felt profound relief. Blessedly, the rest of the night slid by, and before long her mother came to collect her.